Well, when this therapist and Christian doctor entered our home and began to tell me all of the things that Mark had done, I really literally had no idea that any of this was part of his life. And yet, at this time, we had been married almost 15 years. So I was totally blindsided. And as I looked over at Mark sitting in a chair across from me, I could see that if you hadn't told me anything otherwise, I would have thought he had been shot. I mean, he was kind of doubled over, he was pale. I could tell that he was really in shock and broken, I think is the word I would best describe him at that moment. I knew prior to that for several months that I thought he was struggling with a lot of burnout at work, and that's what we had talked about somewhat at home. He was really unhappy with, how stressful his schedule was, and as he mentioned, he was involved, heavily in the community as well as at his own work, and we had 3 young children, so life was really packed, and it made sense to me that he had burnout, and so I kind of bought into that and watched him kind of sinking that way, but I had no idea all of the sexual acting out was part of all of this for him. I remember that just 1 month actually before I was told this information about Mark, that I suffered a TIA, which is a mini stroke of sorts. I lost all feeling on the right side of my body. I was totally paralyzed. And, it was a really major event in my life. They took me to the hospital. They ran numerous tests on me at that time, and they never really were able to find anything wrong with me. Now years later, after I've been involved with all of my work, what I really understand about that, I believe, was that it was my body's way of expressing what my body knew, even though intellectually I didn't. I guess I could even use the term codependency. I mean, I was really in my own way dying from my own codependency, and I really didn't even know what that was about. Well, when Mark left for treatment, which was very suddenly, we had only talked about it for a few days, so lots of things were happening very quickly. I found myself being, I was a real mixture of feelings, really. I was still incredibly angry, getting angry about what had happened, very frightened about how in the world I would deal with 3 children, our family, and Mark out of work. I was hopeful at the same time because there was a sense that this was explaining some of the distance I had felt in our relationship for years, and my hope that there was something more for us. So I was a real mixture of a lot of feelings. I think I was also profoundly alone because there was no one that came for me to help me. And, today I know I speak about this as much as I do because that's such an important time for spouses to have somebody come alongside. Obviously, even though it was 18 years ago, it was like it was yesterday sometimes. But it would have been wonderful to have someone come and just sit with me. Well, I believe it was 2 weeks into Mark's treatment that I was invited to be part of Family Week, and I was really excited to go and participate. I don't know why exactly. I know there are a lot of wives that maybe wouldn't think about it that way. They would just want their husbands to go off, get fixed, come back, be better, and life will be wonderful. But there must have been a spirit in me that prompted me to know that getting involved in this way was going to be a really important part of our healing journey as a couple. So I made arrangements for the kids, I guess, and the interesting thing is I honestly don't even remember what they were. I had to drive 5 hours to get to Minnesota where Mark was, and I guess my parents or someone came and took care of them, but obviously I was in a state of shock myself. I just know that I got myself there at that time. That felt like a huge accomplishment for me to even pull that off. And when I got there, it was a wonderfully caring, nurturing place to be. And I remember being fully engaged in everything they had going there for Mark, which they offered for the spouses as well. We went to seminars for educational things. I met with the psychologists and psychiatrists that Mark worked with there. I was in small group support with other wives. We had lots of time to talk ourselves, so it was a wonderful time for Mark and I to really claim a new beginning. God, first of all, led us to some phenomenal help. I know that given our own resources, we would have never been able to find the help we were led to. And it was really by the grace of God that this little bitty counseling center in the middle of nowhere had these incredibly gifted therapists. For those of you who are interested in dollar signs, you're like, how in the world are we ever going to be able to manage this? We basically are unemployed at this point, and this is expensive, and yet it's as if we were told we had a terminal cancer, within our marriage, and we needed to do everything we could to fight this. And I think we trusted God that He would lead us through this somehow. And, I honestly don't remember how that all worked, but it did. And day by day, we were able to manage just getting through it. And I think we knew so much about the exhilaration of going each time and figuring out another piece of who we are and how we could grow and how we could become more intimate in our relationship together. Well, I would say, too, that, there were always the right people who God seemed to bring in my life. I remember starting by saying how lonely I was in this process. And yet, through it all, there was not always a lot of people, but there was the right person and the right kind of help that continued to lead me on to hope. It's not to say that I didn't have an awful lot of emotions that I needed to work through. This was not an easy time, the first 6 months, certainly. But, I think the Lord led me to a safe place where I could work through those emotions and not necessarily take out all of that on Mark, which I think would have been incredibly damaging to our relationship. Not to say that I haven't learned how to be honest with my feelings with him and share my hurt and my anger and my disappointment. But surely at that stage, after 15 years of all these secrets, I was pretty filled with a lot of emotion that I needed a safe place with other safe women to be able to share and to grow through that so that I could, come home and share with Mark some of the hope I still had that he could hear at that point. So God was very gracious to me in that. And I think also in terms of, teaching or leading Mark to a place of also being patient with me. I've seen a lot of recovering men who don't have much patience with their wife when they're showing their hurt and their anger and their disappointment. And, because of, I think, the broken place that the Lord took Mark, he was able to be incredibly patient with my questions, with my needs, with my feelings, and to stay there with me. And that was a real gift.